In the winter of 1991, a superpower fell. The vast expanse of the Soviet Union, a nation that had reshaped the course of history, simply ceased to exist. For decades, the USSR stood as a titan of the 20th century, a rival to the West, a symbol of both communist ideology and relentless ambition. Yet, within a breathlessly short span, it vanished from the world map. This wasn't just the end of a country, it was the collapse of an entire system. So, how does a seemingly unshakable empire vanish? Well, the seeds of the Soviet Union's destruction were sown far earlier than you might think. Let's rewind and introduce the players on the stage. The Soviet Union wasn't born from a vacuum. To grasp its fall, we need to rewind back to the Russian Empire, an age of czars and absolute power. That empire crumbled in the fires of World War I, and from its ashes rose a radical experiment, a revolution fueled by the writings of Karl Marx and led by the fiery Vladimir Lenin. This was no mere change of government. The Bolsheviks, as Lenin's party was known, sought to upend the very foundations of society. Private property, religion, even the old social order, targets in the name of building a communist utopia. Yet the birth of the Soviet Union was bathed in blood. A brutal civil war raged before the red flag flew over Moscow. In the decades that followed, the USSR was forged under the iron fist of Joseph Stalin. Millions perished in his forced labor camps and manufactured famines, all in the name of warped progress. Yet the Soviet Union did industrialize, and it survived the onslaught of World War II, emerging battered but undeniably a superpower. The years after Stalin saw a degree of thawing relative openness under Nikita Khrushchev and a bizarre mix of power and stagnation under Leonid Brezhnev. All the while, the Soviet Union poured vast resources into its military, its space program, a global struggle for influence against the West. Yet, the economy creaked under the weight of a system that crushed individual initiative and ignored the needs of ordinary people. This, my friends, is the stage on which the Soviet Union's final act played out. It was a superpower built on grand promises, but with a fatal flaw deep within its core. Imagine a machine built on faulty principles, running for decades on sheer momentum. That was the Soviet Union in its twilight. Cracks were papered over, but the fundamental problems festered. The command economy, where the state decided what to produce and in what quantities, was a recipe for inefficiency and shortages. Consumer goods were an afterthought. Imagine living in a society where a new pair of shoes was a luxury, not a necessity. Meanwhile, the nations of Eastern Europe, held under Moscow's sway since the end of World War II, were growing restless. The Soviets called them allies, but they were effectively captive states. Dreams of liberation simmered, occasionally boiling over in protests, only to be crushed by Soviet tanks. This web of control was costly to maintain, bleeding resources the system could ill afford. Then came Mikhail Gorbachev, the Soviet Union's final leader, a man who, ironically, wanted to save the system but ended up dismantling it. His reforms, glasnost, openness and perestroika, restructuring, were meant to breathe life back into a stagnating superpower. But they backfired spectacularly. Gorbachev loosened the reins of censorship, allowing long-suppressed grievances to flood public discourse. He tried tinkering with the economy, but half measures only created more chaos. Most dangerously, the relaxation of iron-fisted control ignited those sparks of defiance in Eastern Europe. Poland defied the Kremlin and survived. Hungary opened its borders, and the dominoes began to fall. The Berlin Wall, that grim symbol of the Cold War, was torn down. One by one, Soviet satellites broke free. The empire in Europe was crumbling, and Moscow seemed powerless to stop it. Back within the Soviet Union, the genie was out of the bottle. Nationalist movements long suppressed within the multi-ethnic republics flared up. The Baltic states, Lithuania, Latvia, Estonia, were among the first to boldly demand independence. The economy went into a tailspin. Gorbachev was increasingly isolated, caught between hardliners longing for the old ways and reformers like Boris Yeltsin, who smelled blood in the water. A bungled coup by those hardliners in August 1991 was the final nail in the coffin. It sealed Gorbachev's fate and catapulted Yeltsin, president of the giant Russian Republic, to the forefront. By December 1991, it was over. Republic after republic seceded. Gorbachev, a leader without a country, resigned. The Soviet flag came down from the Kremlin for the last time. Empires don't die quietly, and the USSR's ending wasn't clean. Some breakaway republics spiraled into war. The economic shock was brutal, but there was no turning back the clock. The collapse of the Soviet Union didn't usher in a global utopia. The world remained a messy place. Old conflicts reignited, new ones flared up. Former republics grapple with the complexities of independence, some sliding into authoritarianism themselves. The legacy of that vanished empire looms large over the rise of Vladimir Putin, whose brand of Russian nationalism seeks to claw back lost influence. The fall of the USSR was seen by some as the triumph of capitalism over communism. Yet, the world's other superpower giant, China, watched closely. It drew its own lessons, blending communism in name with a tightly controlled market economy, a testament to the enduring power of authoritarianism. So did the Soviet collapse signal the end of history, as some proclaimed? Hardly. It simply closed one chapter and opened several more that we're still wrestling with today. Perhaps the greatest lesson lies in the fragility of seemingly unshakable systems, in the understanding that empires built on coercion, fear, and flawed ideologies eventually meet their breaking point. Thank you for joining me on this journey through history. If the story of the Soviet Union resonates with you, be sure to like and subscribe for more explorations of the events that have shaped our world. Until next time, stay curious.